Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today. My name is Lindsay Goff. I'm the Digital Marketing Manager at PeopleForBikes. We're very excited to have you with us. It's nice to see people joining the chat. Today we are talking about city ratings, really exciting. So if you wouldn't mind dropping into the chat maybe something about the new city ratings that surprised you, delighted you, something that made you excited. And before we jump into the presentation, I would like to give a huge sincere thank you to our members. We really appreciate all that you do, the conversations that you're having, and the work that you're doing to advance the industry forward. So again, thank you for joining. My name is Lindsay Goff. We're talking about city ratings, and into the chat we are dropping something that surprised us or excited us about the ratings this year. And with that, I would like to go ahead and turn the presentation over to our VP of Local Innovation, Kyle Wagenschutz. Very excited to have him with us today, and he's going to bring some amazing expertise, and we've got a lot to share with you. So Kyle, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for making time out of your busy Thursday schedules to join us and talk a little bit about our brand new city ratings data releases that just happened on June the 3rd. It's hard to believe, but this is the fourth year that PeopleForBikes has conducted its annual city ratings. And we have some really amazing new features for the program this year. And also wanted to sort of dive into not just the importance of understanding and rating cities, understanding how they're performing for bicycling, but really talk more today about what does it mean for you all? What does it mean to get a score in city ratings? How can you use that information to make bicycling better where you live? And so I want to not spend so much time today talking about the nuts and bolts of how city ratings works, but really about how we can all take information, data, things that can be a little bit nerdy day in and day out, and turn that into action to make bicycling better for us. And so I'll spend a little bit of time talking about sort of the results for this year, what we did, what we accomplished, and then really sort of dive into some nitty-gritty details. We'll have some time at the end for some Q&A. So if we get a little too data-oriented or a little too nerdy, and you want to ask a question, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. Lindsay will be monitoring that, and we'll circle back around to those questions at the end. Like I mentioned, this is the fourth year that we've released our annual city ratings. And every single year, the program has grown to include more cities. 4 years ago, we had just over 300 US cities participating. And this year, 660 US cities is what we're up to now. That's a lot of cities. If I dared any of you to name 660 US cities, I think you would struggle to do so. But I'm also pleased to announce that for the very first time, we've also included international cities. And we'll talk a little bit later about why that's really important. But you should know that there are 11 countries represented outside of the United States, including parts of Australia, Canada, and some countries in Europe as well. And so in total, we have almost nearing 800 cities now participating in the program, and we're performing this data analysis for all of those cities. City ratings is pretty easy to understand. It's a score on a 0 to 100 scale. 100 is an amazing score for bicycling. A 0 is a terrible score for bicycling. I can attest that we don't have any cities scoring a 0. And there's two main components of city ratings. There is a network score and a community score, and taken together, those make your rating. And so really the metric here is to sort of suggest, where is your city at? How close to 100 can we get? And where are the opportunities to make improvements along the way? That network score is really about looking at how safe and convenient and connected is the community that you live in. This is an example of two different bicycle networks from communities here in the United States, towns of about the similar size and population. You'll notice that the bicycle network for Boulder, Colorado looks like the road network. You might open a map and think, wow, I can get anywhere in this town on a bicycle. If you were living, however, in Bloomington, Illinois, you might be able to take a trail to part of the town, but you can see there's some real big disconnects between the bike lanes and trails that exist there compared to the counterpart in Boulder. What's really interesting to know is that your bicycle network, the combination of bike lanes, trails, pathways, quiet neighborhood streets, is the #1 indicator about a number of things for bicycling in your community. It is a predictor of how many people are riding bikes. The more connected and safe your bicycle network feels, the more people get out there and ride. It's an indicator of safety. It means that that you've created separated space where bikes feel comfortable, no matter if a person is young or old, no matter what their ability is, that they feel safe riding a bicycle there. For this reason, the network score is a big portion of our city ratings, and it actually represents about 80% of the total score. The second portion of our scoring is the community score. And this is really an acknowledgement that a bunch of data scientists sitting in a room looking at maps of the community isn't the sole determinant about whether bicycling is good. Our bicycling mapping, our network score, for instance, can't tell if the bike lane ends into a safety barrier, like in this photo. It can't tell precisely whether a bicycle lane feels safe while someone's riding. So we go out every single year and we ask thousands of people living and biking in these communities what it's like to bike there. Do they feel safe while they're riding bikes? Do they feel like the city's making investments to make bicycling better? How often are they riding bicycles? And this is really a score that is created by users, bicyclists, and residents of the communities they live in to help us validate the information about what we see from a bicycling network score. It's a key factor in understanding bicycling safety, bicycling ridership, and how people view the infrastructure in their community. Taken together, why do these two scores matter? Well, the #1 determinant about whether people are going to choose to ride a bicycle in the community is whether or not they feel like that bicycle infrastructure can safely get them to the places they want to go. Whether they're traveling to a trailhead to go mountain biking, or going to the library with their children, going to their job Monday through Friday, or simply making a trip to the grocery store or the movie theater, bicycling has to be able to support, the infrastructure has to be able to support people choosing to make that trip by bicycle. And if we aren't providing that basic foundational element of having safe, convenient places to ride, we don't really have much hope of actually encouraging people to ride bicycles. The second piece is that people who are riding bikes have to believe that biking is a safe, convenient option for them. And that's more than just having a great trail. That's more than just having safe access to working bicycles. It's really about creating a culture of belief that bicycling is convenient, that it's efficient, that it's safe. And sometimes that goes beyond simply building infrastructure. That goes into communications, it goes into marketing, it goes into how we share the joy of bicycling with our constituents. Those are the two primary factors that really determine whether a community is going to be successful for bicycling. The city ratings was measured to help quantify what that means, because even as I describe it, I think to myself, well, what does that mean? How do I know if I'm doing a good job at building infrastructure that connects people? How do we know if we're doing a good job of marketing and communicating and selling the joy and the benefits that bicycling has to our community? And so city ratings was really created to help us accomplish this comparison. How do we measure infrastructure in a way that's meaningful across any city that we work in? How do we incorporate the perceptions that people have and also bring those into that scoring system? And so city ratings is really here to help us evaluate bicycling networks. In this example on the screen right here are two cities here in the United States. You can see the blue that's indicated with Boulder, Colorado, where our headquarters is located. Blue is an indication that bicycling is relatively safe, connected, and convenient. So if you're starting your bicycle ride in any of these blue spots, you can be assured that you can reach parks, grocery stores, doctor's offices, even your neighbor's house safely and comfortably when using a bicycle. Not every community can have that same claim to their bicycling network. And we might be building infrastructure in these communities, but it may not be making the kinds of connections that we need to have. And that's a really important piece. The other important piece is, again, about that perception of people in the communities. And you can see again here, these are screenshots taken from the City Ratings website for those two communities. And this is a measure of those community perceptions as it relates to, are members of the community aware that the city's investing in bicycling? Is the bicycling network, do people believe that it helps them get to the store? Do they believe it helps them get to work? Are they riding as a result of that? And you can see in this performance that the perceptions for bicycling in Boulder actually outpace those of both Hammond, Indiana, as the peer example here, but outpace all other mid-sized cities in the United States as well. I'd point out that what we see in commonality amongst all cities is that the perception of safety is one that we typically see pretty low scores in. Even the city of Boulder, who's invested heavily in infrastructure, has a network that far outpaces Hammond, Indiana, scores very similarly in terms of how community residents and people riding bikes feel while they're riding those bicycles. So they perceive the infrastructure to be safe. And that, again, it comes down to a marketing and communications challenge about how we begin to sort of tell a new story of bicycling that makes people feel safe while they're doing it. So Kyle, my city got a score of 12. What do I set out on a plan tomorrow to reach 100? The answer is yes, but also the reality of you going from a 12 to 100 in a year is a pretty tough pill to swallow. The opportunity here is not for us to sort of go from worst to best overnight, but it's to begin to plot milestones that your community can begin investing in a sort of a systematic, planned approach. What we find in city ratings is that there's a direct correlation between the scores that communities have and the kinds of riding activity that exist in those communities. If our community started off at a pretty low starting point of 12, what I would want to do as a local advocate, as a local community leader or a business leader, is say, how do we get from 12 to 32? Because that 20-point jump is almost going to be correlated directly with a doubling of cycling activity. No matter where you're starting at, if I can move my score from a 12 to a 32, I can almost be guaranteed that I'm going to see double the more cycling. What does that mean practically? Well, it means that you've built more of your bicycle network. You've created safe places for people to ride. You've given opportunities for people to imagine in real life what cycling could mean for them. It doesn't mean you're going to transform the world. You're not going to get everyone out of your car in your community, but you are going to begin to sort of seed that belief. And these numbers really help us sort of plot the path for that along the way. Well, what's the next step from that? Is that we also see that communities that achieve a score of 50 in the scoring system are really special in the scoring system, because this is the point at which ridership begins to take off in a more exponential way. By that I mean, most of our communities have bicycling education programs. We have programs that promote the use of bicycling. Some of our employers probably incentivize bicycling. Maybe there's even a government subsidy locally that pays people or rewards them financially for riding a bicycle instead of driving or taking another mode of transportation. At a score of 50, that's an indication that your bicycle network is built out enough that it connects people to the places they're trying to get to more often than not. And I know it's a little tricky to sort of get into this, but what you should know is that at 50, that's where the magic begins to happen in your communities. That's where your bicycling events, that's where your promotion, that's where the incentives, that's where people begin to believe that bicycling could be real for them. If you told an average person to go, let's take a ride to the grocery store today instead of driving, you begin to sort of think, wow, my bicycling network does get me to the grocery store. Scores typically below 50, they don't have that sort of belief power. People begin to sort of think about, well, the bike network gets me close to the grocery store, but it doesn't always get me there. And that's what we have to sort of build momentum. We want to build in 20-point chunks over time. And when we get to 50, we want to go all in for bikes. I'll just show you a little mapping of this. You can see some of the communities here in the US. I've included Sevilla, Spain in here as well. You can see that the BNA score pretty much sort of aligns with where communities are in terms of ridership. Notice that above 50, those little black dots begin to rise above the red. And that's what I'm talking about here, is it's no longer a linear relationship, it's an exponential relationship. And those are the communities that we begin to see. There's even more communities in Europe. This is one of the benefits of now measuring global communities. I can't even fit them on this chart because they're so high off the chart that their ridership numbers far exceed any expectation for what's happening for from their BNA score in that facet. This year, I mentioned that we've added 107 global cities, and there's two main reasons for this. One is that for the last 3 years, solely focusing on the US, what we noticed was that there were very few high performers in the US, and began to ask the question, well, what is the benchmark that the US is actually going to do? If we're only comparing ourselves to the best that we have, how do we know what the upper limits of our potential actually is in relation to bicycling? And so by adding a few international cities, some notable cities that we're likely all familiar with, you know, bicycling in Copenhagen or Amsterdam makes a lot of sense. But we wanted to get a bigger breadth of understanding of where the US stood in relation to its counterparts. Looking at Canada is really helpful. Looking at Australia, where the driving and mix of vehicles on the roads is very similar to the US. What we begin to see is that the best the US has to offer still compels in comparison to what the world is offering. And now it just offers us a broader perspective on what we can actually achieve if we dedicate ourselves to making these investments to growing bicycling. We've got a couple outstanding examples here from Montreal, Sevilla, Copenhagen. I think what's really special is that each of these cities have a really unique perspective to offer our American cities, different lessons that we can all take, no matter if we're a small city or a big city. We can look to them to help us with our own benchmarking and our own goal setting. Not surprisingly, we saw European cities dominate the top 10 cities overall. And I think they would have done so more if we had actually included more European cities. We rated 5 cities in the Netherlands this year, and all 5 cities made the top 10. And I think that there are probably some nations out there that as we begin to expand the program and grow the program more, will begin to fill in these top spots in a more robust way. The truth is, you know, they've been making these investments for a longer period of time as a part of their national strategy. They have become world leaders, not because they decided to woke up one morning to love bikes, but because they saw the opportunity that bicycling, walking, and other active modes of transportation brought to their community. Here in the United States, we actually see quite a few small to medium-sized cities rank really high amongst them. And you know, there's a couple of reasons for this. We have some blog posts that explore the reasons why small cities are in the US, small cities and towns are really primed to become rich bicycling communities, the way they've been built, how they're developed, how the streets lay out, how connectivity works in those communities. Small communities in the US offer a lot of opportunity for bicycling in the US. We do have some big cities that are making some big pushes, you know, primarily some of the boroughs of New York and some other cities like San Francisco are really pushing the boundaries and are breaking into this top 10 here in the US. In Australia and Canada, we saw a lot of comparable results to the US. You know, this mixture of cities that are sort of hovering right around that 50 mark as being the best that those countries have to offer. And I think, you know, as we sort of set our sights on the opportunity of achieving scores in the 70s or 80s, that's when we can begin to make those comparisons to our European counterparts and really sort of begin to sort of think about how do we cash in now that we've reached that pivotal point of 50 points. In the US, similarly, we have some medium and small size cities for you to look at. If you visit our Advocacy Academy, we've actually assembled a whole library of videos featuring these cities where you get to learn from local leaders in those communities about what makes them really successful for bicycling. San Luis Obispo was a video that we created last year. after they scored well last year. And we've this year now added Berkeley and Provincetown, Massachusetts, both high performers in this year's city ratings. And I encourage you to visit our Advocacy Academy, because not only does it look at the cities that are performing well, it also has a whole library of videos about how you all can implement different kinds of programs, policies, make your advocacy count in the most effective ways. One of the biggest things that we're looking at right now are speed limits in our roadways. And speed is such a determinant about whether a person feels comfortable while they're riding a bicycle or not. We have a whole series of videos about how you can work to help slow down cars driving on your streets. That's the foundation of making a great, safe, comfortable bike ride for people. We also look at other places about completing your bike networks. We talk about building better bike lanes, how to design them, how public transit works with bicycling. So the Advocacy Academy is a really rich resource that really dives into the nuts and bolts, the how-tos of what you all can do. Combined with city ratings, we now know how our cities are performing, where we're benchmarking, the milestones that we need to achieve, whether we're trying to get a 20-point jump in this next year so we can double cycling, whether we're trying to get to 50 or beyond. We can now use these really simple tools in any of our communities, no matter if we're big or small, at helping make communities better. So that's how we take data, turn it into action, and ultimately make a better world for bicycling. With that, I'm going to thank everyone for tuning in today and turn it over to Lindsay for a couple questions.
Awesome. Wonderful content, Kyle. Very, very informative. And I really would encourage all of you to visit the Advocacy Academy if you're interested in learning more about some of those topics around speed limits, communication. It is a great tool that we would love for you to take advantage of. And yeah, so go ahead and drop some more questions in. We've had a few come throughout. The first one is from, it slipped away from me. It's from Rick in Provincetown. It's interesting that places with high network scores actually have low community scores. Is that normal? Is that expected?
Yeah, good to hear from you, Rick. Taken on a whole, there's some differences between how people perceive their networks to be versus how the networks might be functioning. And that's really why it's important to take both. We can't just look at data. We also have to understand how people sort of perceive that work to be in their communities. We actually tend to find that the lower a network score a community has, they tend to have a higher community score. So people perceive bicycling to be better in those communities than maybe the data suggested it actually is. Where we do have more robust bicycling infrastructure, we actually find that there's a general greater awareness by the population about safety, bicycling, what the community is doing. And those scores tend to be a bit more negative. So if my city is doing great for bicycling, the world knows that it's doing great, I might be a little more extra critical about this next project that's coming, or I might feel that there's too many people riding bikes now. It used to be really nice and quiet. Now there's lots of people riding bikes. So there's a number of different nuances that exist there. I think what's important to note is that the community score, the network score, they're not apples to apples in terms of a 30 in one is a 30 in the other. So we have to sort of look at them as a little bit like apples and oranges, all of which combine together to inform what's happening for a community there.
Great, thank you. And another question that came through at the beginning, this is from David, and David, you didn't ask it, but I'm going to ask the unspoken for you. You're in Santa Luzario in Texas, and you just said we didn't make the list. Why were we not on the list? So is there anything that we need to know about maybe making the list for next year?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I would say first and foremost, there's no limit to the number of cities that we can add to this. What we do require is that communities both have a network score and a community score. The network score is on PeopleForBikes. We're able to run that network analysis without any additional assistance, just about having the name of the city in the list. The community score, though, is predicated on people in that community responding to our online survey. So we begin fielding that survey in July of every year. We run the survey through through the springtime of the next year. And we have a minimum number of surveys that we need to get from a community to have it included. That's just to ensure that one person doesn't take the survey for a whole community and answer on behalf of everyone living there. So we do require, I think it's a minimum of 25 for small cities, all the way up to more 100 for larger cities. And so the best thing for us to do is to make sure your city is in the list. There's an Add My City function on the website where you can flag for us that we're trying to add your city in this next round. And then when this community survey releases, just make sure that when that survey is out, you share it with all of your friends, family, coworkers, and neighbors and get them to respond to the survey.
Great, thank you. Another question from Christopher. Which city had the largest jump in score from last year and why?
Yeah, we just released a story about this a week ago or a week or two ago. And we were looking at St. Paul, Minnesota actually had one of the largest jumps from the previous year. And it's because St. Paul took action last year to reduce speed limits across the city. I was mentioning before that there's been a big emphasis on speed limits, on slowing down motor vehicles. It's a primary way of improving safety for people riding bicycles. So there's proven research that if we have slower speeds and there is a crash, that it's a safer kind of crash than if vehicles are traveling at high speed. There's also proven research that slower speeds make people feel that it's more safe out there. And so lowering speed limits is one of the biggest challenges that US communities face. And St. Paul took that action last year and they saw a huge change in their score. There's a couple of big cities, I'll even name, like Chicago is one of them, that have been making investments in protected bicycle lanes and trails. We can search in media stories for those examples. But Chicago has really high speed limits for cars, and it prevents their score from being better than it can be today. And so I'd encourage you to check out that Advocacy Academy video on slowing streets. It explains why it's really important and what we can do about it.
Great. And we're going to run out of time here in a second, but maybe we'll do a brief answer for Shane from Eugene. He said, we've got a score of 42. Our score is pretty high, and we're working on improving our open streets data to up our BNA score. Do you have any workshops or other learning opportunities for BNA score specifically?
We don't have anything scheduled at the moment, but we do have a full-time staff who are dedicated to helping communities improve the data, the basis of the data that we use for this and the BNA score. And so, Shane, if you reach out to us, we can connect you with our staff who are working on that, and they can either arrange something for you individually or look at a broader gathering in the future.
Awesome. And with that, let's go ahead and put your email up on the screen, Kyle, as well as the website so you can check things out on your own, cityratings.peopleforbikes.org. And again, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a really informative conversation, and we would love to continue this conversation with you. So please feel free to reach out to Kyle if you have any questions.